The reason you master a skill in isolation but fail to deploy it under pressure isn't a lack of talent, it's a catastrophic failure of training. We'll show you the counterintuitive learning shift that makes you dramatically smarter without spending a single extra minute. You know this feeling, right? You put in the hours, you perfect every single move in practice, but then when the pressure's on, when the game is on the line, it's like that knowledge just vanishes. The solution isn't about more practice, it's about a fundamentally different kind of practice. It's a framework called Interleaving, and it's built on one incredibly powerful idea. Mastery isn't just about how you store information, it's about how you retrieve it in the absolute chaos of the real world. Okay, so here's our game plan. We're gonna break this down into 6 key parts. We'll start by digging into the problem itself, the performance paradox, and the dangerous illusion of competence it creates. Then, we'll pivot to the solution, the interleaving framework, the hard science behind why it works, and a super practical 3-step protocol you can start using literally today. And we'll wrap it all up with a crucial mindset shift you have to make for this to stick, the rule of struggle. All right, first up, section 1, the performance paradox. This really gets to the heart of why so many of us get frustrated. See, we're taught to practice one specific thing over and over again in a nice, neat little block until it feels perfect. But here's the twist. That very method, the one that makes you feel so good in practice, is exactly what can cause you to choke under pressure. It creates this massive, frustrating gap between your training and your real-world performance. And that leads us right into section 2, because this paradox creates something really dangerous, the illusion of competence. You know what I'm talking about. It's that feeling you get when you're just crushing it in your practice session and you think, nailed it, I've got this. But that confidence is built on sand. It's a fragile confidence that can completely shatter the second you step outside of that neat, predictable training environment. So now we're gonna get scientific and diagnose exactly why this happens. So take a look at this. This visual breaks down the entire problem and the solution perfectly. On the left, you've got traditional blocked practice. You drill skill A, then you drill skill B, then you drill skill C. It feels clean, organized, really efficient. But trust me, it's a trap. Now look at the right. That's interleaving. It looks messy, chaotic, kind of random, right? A, then C, then B. But that chaos, that's where the magic happens. That's what forces your brain to build real, flexible strength. The scientific name for what's going on here is retrieval failure. See, when you practice in those nice, neat blocks, your brain starts to use the context of the drill as a mental crutch. It knows, okay, for the next 20 minutes, every single problem is a skill A problem. It doesn't have to work to figure out which skill to use. And this is exactly what creates that dangerous illusion of competence, because that crutch makes your practice performance feel deceptively easy. So, here's the billion-dollar question. What happens when that context cue, that mental crutch, is suddenly gone? Because in a real-world high-pressure meeting, or sales call, or presentation, there's no coach there telling you, okay, use skill A now. You're hit with a complex, novel problem, and you have to decide on the spot which tool to pull from your mental toolkit. And if you've only ever trained in blocks, your brain just freezes. The connection isn't there. So how do we fix this? That's where we get to section 3, the interleaving framework. Now, I really want you to get this. Interleaving isn't just another productivity hack or a learning tip. It is a complete system. It's a framework engineered specifically to build flexible, adaptable expertise, the kind of skill that actually shows up for you when the stakes are high. The framework itself is built on 3 core pillars. First, contextual variability. That's just the fancy term for mixing things up. Second, effortful discrimination. This is the heavy lifting your brain has to do. And third, delayed gratification. This is the mindset shift you have to embrace. Let's break down each one. Let's start with that first pillar, contextual variability. This is the absolute foundational rule of interleaving. It just means you have to deliberately mix different types of skills or problems into one single practice session. Why? Because it stops your brain from going on autopilot. It jolts it out of that comfy, passive, low-effort mode that feels really productive but is actually building weak, flimsy memories. And that brings us to the core engine of this whole thing, effortful discrimination. This is what drives deep, lasting learning. Think about it. Every time you switch from a problem that uses skill A to one that uses skill C, you force your brain to stop and ask, whoa, wait a second, what kind of problem is this? What's the right tool to use now? That simple act of choosing and retrieving the correct mental model, that is what strengthens the neural pathways for good. And that leads to the third pillar, which, let's be honest, is probably the hardest one: delayed gratification. I'm going to be straight with you. Interleaving feels harder. Your performance during practice will probably be worse than with block practice. You're going to feel a little confused, maybe a little slow, but you have to understand that struggle is not a sign that you're failing. It is the very signal that your brain is physically rewiring itself for true mastery. It's a feature, not a bug. Okay, so we've got the framework down. That brings us to section 4, the science of mastery. Now we're going to go a level deeper and look at the hard science of why this kind of strategic struggle is so powerful. We're going to look at what's actually happening inside your brain that allows this method to literally rewire it for peak performance. So interleaving gives you 3 huge psychological advantages that traditional practice just can't touch. First, it directly strengthens the actual pathways your brain uses for memory retrieval. Second, it helps you build way better mental models. Scientists call them schemas. And third, it keeps your brain right in that sweet spot of challenge, what we call optimal cognitive load. Let's talk about those retrieval pathways. Think of it like lifting weights for your brain. Every single time you successfully pull a piece of information from your memory, the neural path to that information gets a little bit wider, a little bit faster. By constantly forcing you to retrieve different skills in different orders, interleaving is like doing reps for your memory. It builds these super robust, flexible pathways that are way more resistant to being forgotten over time. And then there's schema formation, building those powerful mental models. This is so cool. By putting different but related problems right next to each other, you force your brain to notice the subtle differences, and, just as importantly, the deep structural similarities. It's kind of like a chef tasting different sauces side by side to really understand the nuances. This constant comparison is what builds rich, complex mental models. And that is the foundation of expert intuition, the ability to just see the pattern and know the right move instantly. All right, this is where theory becomes action. Welcome to section 5, your 3-step protocol. We're done with the what and the why. Now it's all about the how. I'm going to give you a simple, pragmatic, step-by-step guide you can use to put interleaving to work in your own life, starting right now. I really want you to lock these 3 steps in your head. They are non-negotiable if you want this to work. It's simple. First, you're going to audit your skills. Second, you're going to shuffle your practice. And third, you're going to track your results in a whole new way. Audit, shuffle, track. Got it? Okay, step 1 is the audit. Take a core skill you really want to master. We'll use project management as an example here. Now, break it down into at least 3 distinct smaller parts, or micro skills. So for project management, that might be delegation, budgeting, and reviewing metrics. These become your practice blocks, A, B, and C. Step 2 is the shuffle. This is where you actually do the work. So in your next 60-minute practice session, you are not going to spend the whole hour just on delegation. Nope. Instead, you'll work on delegation for 10 minutes, then, and I mean immediately, no break, you switch to 10 minutes of budgeting, then another 10 on reviewing metrics, then you repeat that cycle. The key is forcing that abrupt mental gear shift between topics. Now, as you do this, I need you to burn this idea into your mind. When you make that switch from budgeting over to metrics, your brain is going to feel a little jolt, maybe some confusion. You have to learn to reframe that feeling. That is not the feeling of failure. That is the feeling of your brain engaging in effortful discrimination. It is the literal, physical signal that deep learning is happening. Learn to lean into it. And finally, step 3 is tracking. And this requires a total shift in how you measure your progress. You have to stop judging your success based on how you perform during that hard, confusing practice session. That's a fool's metric. The true test is retrieval. 1 week after your shuffle drill, schedule a real-world simulation, a mock presentation, a practice sales call, and track how accurately you can apply those mixed skills in a totally new situation. That is your new scoreboard. Okay, this all leads us to our final and honestly, the most important section of all, the rule of struggle. This isn't just about learning a new technique. It's about adopting a completely new philosophy for how you approach getting better at anything. And this is it. This is the single biggest lesson you should take away from our time together. If your training feels smooth, if it feels comfortable, if it feels easy, you are almost certainly wasting your time. You're building fragile knowledge and reinforcing that illusion of competence. Real, lasting mastery only ever happens right at the edge of your ability. It requires strategic, desirable difficulty. So let's bring it all home. Interleaving is the system that directly solves that frustrating problem of retrieval failure and the dangerous illusion of mastery. And why this matters so much is that it gives you a systematic way to accelerate how you learn, helping you build robust, flexible knowledge that you can actually use when it counts. By mixing your practice and forcing that effortful discrimination, you are literally strengthening your brain's retrieval pathways. You're enhancing your pattern recognition by building better mental schemas. So remember this, productivity isn't about grinding out more hours. It's about mastering systems that make focus effortless.